Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here with you. I'm Rebecca Winthrop. I am the director of the Center for Universal Education at Brookings. Thank you for joining us for this annual symposium where we showcase the incredible, optimistic and hopeful work of our Echidna Scholar cohort. As you've seen, the focus of this year's symposium is reshaping narratives toward resilient futures. Very fitting, given that we have large discussions happening at COP right now on the other side of the world in Dubai. And we really are situating a lot of the Echidna Scholars' work, or rather, I should say the Echidna Scholars are really situating their work in the global intersections of crises that the world is facing, from climate change to rising authoritarianism to continuing to recover from COVID-19. And these intersecting economic, environmental, and socio-political crises exacerbate existing gender inequalities, and it significantly impacts learning opportunities and life outcomes for a large majority of girls and young women across the world. And it's within this context that education systems are really a crucial lever for transformative social change, enabling today's girls and young women to develop a range of skills they need to participate and thrive in the world. And the problem is that today's set of challenges also really require us to think how local and global narratives around education systems can be reshaped through centering the voices and experience of youth today, especially girls and young women. And you will hear quite a bit about that in today's session. And we are going to be hearing from our 2023 Echidna Global Scholars cohort. They are going to share their lessons of the research they've done over the last 6 months, looking how to address systemic challenges faced by girls and young women and highlight feasible pathways for creating more resilient and gender equal futures. Again, I always love this event because there is, as no matter what the doomsday headlines are of global news, it's always a great reminder of the incredible work that's being done by many, many people on the ground. In case you don't know, the Echidna Global Scholars Program Visiting Fellowship supports emerging leaders in gender equality and education from the Global South during a 6-month fellowship at Brookings. And as they pursue individual research focused on improving learning opportunities and life outcomes for girls and young women in their home countries, they bring these learnings to bear regionally and globally. And this year's cohort of Scholar, once again, brings a diversity of backgrounds and richness of perspectives to their study of gender-transformative climate literacy in Bhutan, empowering socioeconomically marginalized girls in India, strengthening school reentry policies for pregnant and teenage mothers in Uganda's refugee and host communities, and decolonial approaches towards reproductive health education in Egypt. And to kick us off, and I'm sure she will remind you also, but for anybody who, after attending this session, is excited to say I have a colleague who, or I myself, want to apply to be a Echidna Scholar. The applications are open, so please go to the website and share it widely with your networks. But over to you, Amna, to kick off. Amna Kayum coordinates the Global Echidna Scholars Program and is part of our Gender Equality in and Through Education team here at CUE. So over to you, Amna, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for the warm welcome and for laying out the focus of our conversation today. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today in what we hope will be an engaging and thought-provoking conversation. So as Rebecca mentioned, my name is Amna Kayum, and I'm a fellow at the Center for Universal Education at Brookings. So throughout this discussion, we invite you to share your questions and comments on X using the hashtag Echidna Symposium hashtag, or to email them to events@brookings.edu. And now we'll turn to our panel conversation with the 2023 Echidna Global Scholars. Joining us today is Anusha Bharadwaj. who is the Executive Director of Voice for Girls India. Hi, Anusha. Voice for Girls India, VOICE for Voice, is an NGO that strives to eliminate gender inequality by empowering marginalized adolescent girls and boys. Previously, Anusha has founded Soch for Social Change, an organization working on women's leadership skills. She is an Ashoka Fellow and has also held numerous fellowships, including with the East West Center and the Harvard Dasra Social Impact Leadership Program. Anusha's work has also been recognized with many awards, including the the World Economic Forum's Award for Exceptional Women of Excellence in 2019. Thank you for being here with us today, Anusha. Our second 2023 Echidna Global Scholar is Nariman Mustafa, who is a Cairo-based educator, researcher, and community organization in the broader field of decolonial and social justice-based education. Hi, Nariman. Nariman is currently a senior researcher at the EdTech Hub and is also concurrently a senior analyst at Open Development and Education. Nariman also serves as a curriculum developer and advisor for Davar for Arts on a project focusing on regional sexual and reproductive health and rights. And she has also founded several initiatives for re-envisioning justice-based education, including Mesahat, liberating learning spaces for children. Nariman also holds a master's degree in education from Harvard University. Also with us today is Susan Opok, who is the Executive Director of the Forum for African Women Educationalists Uganda chapter. Hi, Susan. Susan has also previously served as the Country Director for Nurture Africa and has also been a Program Manager for the Windle Trust in Uganda. Her work over the years has focused on the role of education and maternal and sexual health in strengthening gender equality in post-conflict settings. She's worked closely with the government of Uganda and other developmental stakeholders at the subnational, national, and international levels. And Susan sits on the board, various boards leading the charge in girls' education. Susan also holds an MSc in Natural Resource Management and Sustainable Agriculture from the Agricultural University in Norway. And a final, but definitely not the least, 2023 Kinder Global Scholar 2023 is Tinley Toden, who's a social entrepreneur and CEO and co-founder for the Center for Sustainability Studies in Bhutan. Here, Tinley leads a portfolio of initiatives at the nexus of gender, climate, and education. And she's also the founding curator of the Global Shapers Thimphu Hub. She's also currently a board member for Read Bhutan, a nonprofit she founded. Tinley has also held many fellowships previously, including with Stanford University, Acumen, Vital Voices, and the East West Center. And she holds a master's in public administration degree from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So I'm so glad to be in conversation with all of you today and having had the opportunity to learn from all of you in the last 6 months. And to our public who's watching us, please remember to share your questions and comments on X using hashtag Echidna Symposium or to email them to events@brookings.edu. So to start off our conversation today, could each of you briefly share the focus of your research and tell our audience a little bit about how your own life experiences and challenges have shaped your interest in this topic? And we'll start with Susan.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I hope we are all well. Thank you for being here today. My name is Susan Opok, as has been said, Executive Director, Forum for African Women Educationalists Uganda, an organization whose mandate is girls' education. I personally is very passionate about girls' education. And so my research topic looked at school re-entry for pregnant girls and young mothers in refugee settings in Uganda. Reason being that over the past years, as we know, child marriage, teenage pregnancy is on the increase, has been on the increase, and continues to be so. Globally, we find that over 11% of 15 to 19-year-olds are actually young mothers. And then in Uganda, we look at 25% of teenage pregnancy rate currently. And this involves, the nationals as well as the refugees who within the Uganda system, allowed to enjoy the benefits of the national the legal system. So looking at that and the challenge of the pandemic, the recent pandemic, we saw that so many girls got pregnant. In Uganda, over 1,000 girls got pregnant per day. And so, the question is, what will happen to these girls if we do not return them to school? And so the government of Uganda approved a guideline, a framework through which girls should be able to return to school. So the question is, why is it that despite the framework, that girls are not able to, to return to school? So we found out that there are many barriers that, challenge the girls. So my research is try to look at how we can move from policy on paper to actually practice, so that these guidelines can support the girls and impact the lives of girls. And my interest in this has virtually been because of, my previous work in the area of supporting vulnerable young girls and young conflict-affected young people to, to return to school so that they can contribute to the well-being of the nation, but also to their own families. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everybody. Namaste to everybody in India. I'm Anusha Bharadwaj. I come from India. I am a girls' rights advocate and founder of Voice for Girls, VOICE. It's an NGO that focuses on creating a gender-equal world where girls take charge of their futures and drive economic and social progress. But before I talk about my research, for which I'm here today, I want to draw your attention to India. 40% of India's population and are adolescents and youth. And one cannot talk about India without talking about the sheer numbers, right? So 120 million adolescent girls live in India at the moment. And even when I was growing up, and without wanting to reveal my age, I can say that the line "because you're a girl" very much defined my early years. And sadly, this continues to be the story for many of these 120 million adolescent girls. Strict gender norms and rules still governs their life. And so really my research is on focusing on the criticality of the age, because for these adolescent girls, life decisions are taken for them and it can take them to a completely different path. So what are the ecosystem challenges that these girls are facing? And through a case study of Voice for Girls, we also see how girls are overcoming these barriers and taking charge of their lives. So that's why I'm here today, and very nice to for all of you to join us.
Thanks, Anusha. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Ahlan wa sahlan to people tuning in from the Arab world. I come from Egypt, and my research is trying to answer this question. How can the government in Egypt create an enabling decolonial environment for comprehensive sexuality education for adolescents, particularly through a lens of multiple stakeholder partnerships? And I'm sure we'll talk about this more as the questions keep going. But honestly, it all starts for me personally being a girl in Egyptian classrooms who have been subjected to topics around sexuality or rather not subjected to topics around sexuality or reproductive health. I've only had one lesson in middle school during 13 years of schooling. And honestly, even that one time was very awkward. And the male science teacher had asked the female teacher to come and talk to us and so on. But later on, as a development professional and as a researcher who works on social justice and education broadly, I have worked with women, with adolescents, refugees for years, using community arts, things like drama and storytelling and theater to surface topics of oppression in society. And sexual and reproductive health were among the topics that came out the most. And I saw that adolescents had aspirations for renegotiating gender norms, for access to health information, for feeling safe on the streets, in homes and schools. I mean, it's alarming, but there is 99% of women in Egypt that report being subjected to sexual harassment once in their lifetimes at least. And so this is where I saw this opportunity to work on a policy research to address the different silos that exist among different efforts in Egypt, and also center a heritage-based lens. In other words, a decolonial lens for comprehensive sexuality education in Egypt.
Hey everyone, so I'm the last and the fourth scholar in the row. My name is Chinle Choden. I'm from Bhutan. As Amna said, I'm a social entrepreneur and consultant. I work at the intersection of climate change, women and youth engagement, and entrepreneurship. So I think Rebecca actually kind of gave a good background as to the space I work in, which is climate change. And my research specifically looks at gender-transformative climate literacy. It really trying to look at the gender dynamics and how climate change impact will exacerbate the underlying disparities and therefore make it harder for women and girls to adapt and rebound. But at the same time, also to challenge the gender norms around societal gender norms, and then skilling young people with the right kind of climate mind frames, tools, mindsets, so that they're better adapted to be a resilient citizen or Bhutanese citizen. Specifically for me, I'm working on Bhutan in a world that will be more and more climate impacted. In terms of how I came about on my research topic, really it's through my work experience. I've been working with young people and women, girls for almost a decade now, and more specifically around environment and climate, and realizing that there's a lot of curiosity, a lot of young people want to learn, but there's a lack of space where they can get the right exposure, the right tools, the right platform. And then also over the years, realizing that our education system is actually not leveraged upon to do this when we have extensive network of schools with kids in schools ready to learn. So putting all that together came about, and then here at King's to really understand how can we push this agenda of gender transformative climate literacy for a world that is to produce people that are fit for purpose in an impacted world. So thank you. Over to you, Amna.
Thank you so much, Chinle, and thank you, everyone. And I know it's a challenge to sort of distill your research in such a short amount of time. But thank you, and I hope it's helped our audience learn just a little bit more about the work that you've been doing over the last few months. And Chinle, you mentioned that you work at the intersection of gender, climate, and education, and in some ways you're trying to reshape a new narrative about how these fields are connected. And I'd like to pick up from there and connect to this year's symposium theme, which is reshaping narratives toward resilient futures. And within education systems, ecosystems, and this is a word, Anusha, that you used, we're confronted with particular narratives. They can be around gender norms, they can be about what forms of knowledge are valued, or who's considered an important or valuable stakeholder in the education ecosystem. And these narratives can be highly contextual and local, or they can also hold global resonance. What they have in common is power to shape policy and practice. So for our Echidna Global Scholars, as leaders in the gender equality in and through education field, what is a powerful narrative in your area of focus? And what did you learn in your research that helps reshape it? And to make sure, Chinle, that you're not always the last one, we'll start with you this time.
Okay, thank you, Amna. I think your point of narrative holding power is to shape policy and practice is very important. I think it also adds or shapes people's views and perceptions, which sometimes it's more powerful than policy and practice in some ways, especially when you're trying to change societal norms around gender. So a powerful narrative about gender equality in and through education in Bhutan actually is largely a very positive narrative, because we have over 90% school enrollment at gender parity and about 95% completion of up-secondary education. However, such a positive narrative pushes out any kind of conversation around complexity, the multitude of other issues on gender and learning outcomes. So while this positive narrative is important and it's true, it doesn't allow for the space to grow and to innovate and be better in terms of educating our young generation. And although we are a matrilineal society traditionally, we are not a matriarchal society, and gender stereotypes and norms are deeply entrenched on varying degrees across the country. So this through GTCL, gender transformative climate literacy, it's really to challenge those norms and to be more inclusive and bring young girls and women into the space in a way that is they're better equipped, they're able to contribute, they're able to have access to decision-making powers, as well as access to Agriculture, like for example, agriculture being the largest employer and the largest sector where many people work, although women have property ownership, they may not necessarily have access to climate smart agriculture or access to trainings and knowledge. So really to bring to fore these issues and then to address these issues and to make it more visible in the policy making as well as in the practice, and to create narrative around that. And I think that's through my research on gender transformative climate literacy, I'm really trying to add value to the fact that yes, we have numbers of gender enrollment and at parity, school enrollment at gender parity, but we still have all this other host of things that we need to take care of. And that GTCL could be an approach to do a paradigm shift and to really see how we can be better at it. So that's my 2 bits. Thank you.
There are a little more than 2 bits than me. I really love how you shared how in Bhutan there's no acknowledgement of complexities within a positive narrative and entrenched gender norms. And I'd say there is a similar narrative in Egypt with a lot of differences, contextual differences, of course. But there is a denial. There's a denial that young people have desires and lives that include sexual and reproductive aspects to it. They're too young to talk to them about sexual and reproductive health. That's the narrative. And we can say this is evidenced by the absence of curricular components or in-school programs around comprehensive sexuality education. So that's one part of the narrative. But I'd say there's another part, which is locally, that if we talk to young people about sexual and reproductive health, that it would come with a focus on reproductive health only and birth control, which is a burden that more often than not falls on women's bodies. So this is on a local level, but I also want to touch on the global, because as you said, Amna, local narratives and their global resonance. So on a global level, there is a history that we need to acknowledge for comprehensive sexuality education programs. And it's a history that comes from a desire for population control, particularly by rich and elite towards global South populations. It's more of a fear of poverty. Fearing that the poor will take the places of the rich or the elite, so then we control women's bodies through reproductive health education. And it's important to know that evidence on years and years of development programs says that it's women empowerment and well-being that leads to declining poverty rather than trying to control their fertility. And so, on a global level, this narrative has moved due to feminist efforts into a rights-based CSE, but even this is not enough. And so my research is trying to center a decolonial lens to deconstruct the history of CSE, to build programming that is heritage-based on a local level and revise local patriarchal norms as
well. I'd like to actually start with what should be the powerful narrative. It should be what we say at Voice for Girls, is that when you give a girl her voice, she begins to change the world. That should be the narrative. But the current narrative is, as I quote a girl I spoke to during the research, she said, well, as an adolescent girl, I feel my world is shrinking. I think that's the flip we want. We want to understand that the adolescence is not just a physical and emotional change. And even in that, as Nariman, my colleague said, that there is a lot of shame and stigma around something as natural and normal like menstruation. But to this, you add complexities of socio-cultural expectations, strict gender norms. We lose the voice of the girls. And the shift that the research is also showing is that when you give girls space and knowledge and skills, she begins to find her voice, strengthen her agency. And the beauty about something like this is that then it goes beyond the girl. She widens this circle of solidarity, bring others in this, and create safe spaces for other girls and women. And that's the shift that the research is also pointing towards, because it is much more than this age is not just a stepping stone, but it's very defining. It is on the cusp of adulthood. So a lot needs to go into supporting and embracing these girls and creating an ecosystem of support for them. And that's where I would like to leave this off.
Yes, Anusha, it's very interesting how you talk about the ecosystem, because when you look at the narrative in the refugee host community settings in Uganda, you see that in spite or despite the fact that there is a framework that is supposed to support the girls to return to school, the girls are not in school. So we find that there's an intersection of barriers that do not, that inhibit the girls, return to school. So the question is why? I'll just give an example of a young girl whom we met during the study, whose parents had, because there is really inadequate support for the girls, as well as, intimate partners running away. This young mother had a child who was sick, and because of that, she was admitted, the child was malnourished, so she had no support system. So the issue is, despite the fact that we have a framework, there are many other things that need to be done in order to support the girls to return to school. So the narrative really comes to how to support these girls, how we can actually ensure that there is coherence in terms of how these young people need to be supported. We need to ensure that there is information, provided. There is awareness amongst communities. So in other words, or in short, I'm saying that there are so many things and factors that need to be built and come together in order to support the young people to be in school. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. An important aspect that I think that all of you are bringing to the fore, and that you all mentioned in your research projects as you were doing them, is learning and working directly with young girls and women. And Anusha and Susan, I know you just mentioned right now as well some of the examples, some very poignant examples of how you've learned some of the young women and the girls that you've been working with. So could you reflect on what you learned, on what matters most to young women and girls in your context? And why do you think it's important to center their voices for education systems transformation? So Anusha, maybe we'll start with you.
So the research actually collected data from 1,600 adolescent girls before they went through a Voice for Girls intervention. And then we did FGDs with girls who've been through this intervention. And while I won't be able to share all what I heard, I hope you can come to my workshop on 6th December when I will present more of my research. So day after, same place, same time, I had to say. But also coming back to the question, I want to mention one specific data point that underlines the situation. 85% of the adolescent girls wanted to study beyond high school, but only 30% knew how to pursue their higher education. This is critical to understand, that while there is lack of information, there's also lack of space where they're gaining this information. When we ask girls that, okay, if information is so critical and you want to find more information, who do you ask? And they say that not enough in terms of availability of that information in school. They don't feel comfortable speaking to adults or teachers. And this also is recognizing the fact that, it has to be a safe space. Girls say, well, I'm scared to ask a certain question, especially around sexual reproductive health, because they feel that they'll be judged or there'll be punishment, or, even in some cases that a parent may be called to complain about these girls. So really to say that there is no space. And if there is a space, then girls feel more confident to start taking those issues because they feel more confident about having a say in their future. And girls who've been through Voice for Girls intervention echoed a lot of this. They felt more prepared to navigate adolescence, and at the same time, they felt more confident to negotiate back at home. So they felt that became their tools for raising and strengthening their agency within communities and their families. But I would like to just end by saying that we must have an ecosystem approach, because girls are bombarded by information from media. There is expectations from the community. And there's also just pressure of academics, because they feel if they don't perform and they don't, perform well in school, that they'll get married. So the ecosystem approach must recognize that these girls are embedded in these communities and sees this age as very critical to their lives.
Yes, just picking up from you, Anusha, amongst the refugees and host communities, all the girls that were interviewed said the out of school girls said they wanted to go back or return to school. And actually, this is what we are talking about. How can we ensure that the young mothers, the pregnant girls, return to school and build a future? So the girls are inhibited by various factors. social, cultural, gender discrimination issues and practices. There is child marriage. There are issues about the lack of support by parents. A girl actually told us how, because of her situation, her father told her that, because of being at home, that 4 breasts cannot be in the same house. I mean, you can imagine such kind of language to these young people, because many people think that because a girl has become pregnant, she's an adult, and yet this is a child who needs support, who needs people to stand with her. Other parents, are saying that because you're pregnant, you have to, get married. So we found that, child marriage, forced marriage is really entrenched in the society, in the communities they are in. Intimate partner support, they get a girl pregnant and the girl eventually becomes the person that is being challenged and, said to be, the bad one. Interestingly also, from the policy perspective, one of the, respondents said that, when you have 100 sheep and one gets spoiled, you throw that one out and continue with the others. So, that kind of perspective that makes the girls feel that they are less than human beings, that they are not the kind of people that need to be, is what was coming through the girls. And that really tells us that there is work to do, that despite the fact that we have frameworks, there are certain things, because the government of Uganda came out with the guideline on prevention of prevention of teenage pregnancy and re-entry for young mothers in school settings. But there are these barriers around the girls that inhibit the girls, that do not give confidence to the girls to return to school. So that says that there is a lot of work to do. And as Anusha says, the ecosystem is quite important in all that is done to support the girls. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anusha and Susan. And thank you especially, Susan, in sort of pointing out how important it is to center girls' voices in policymaking as well. And I'd like to pick up on something that I think has been a theme. I think Anusha and Susan, you both mentioned it, is thinking about education as sort of an ecosystem. And how that approach is critical. But sometimes what we see in reality is the persistence of silos, whether they're conceptual or they're institutional. And Nariman and Tinley, I know that you've been thinking a lot about sort of breaking silos and multi-stakeholder partnerships. So could you share with us how silos have shown up in your work? And what does your research say about how they can be broken and how we can move forward? And Nariman, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Silos. So in Egypt, there's a map of actors, right, that surround adolescents, and they take decisions for these adolescents. This includes, you've got the Ministry of Education, you have schools and parents, you have a large sector of citizen sector organizations that do community programs. And there is a much larger ecosystem. You have health professionals, you have religious leaders, you have the media, you have the intangible messages that come through the culture. And so my research engaged with all of these different actors, learning about their work, their status, their motivations, their challenges. Do they communicate with other actors or not? And, I did learn different things about different groups. Some groups might be in the same neighborhood and not speaking to each other. But I did learn that, for example, for adolescents, they do have desires for sexual education and reproductive education. They have ideas about how they want this to happen. Nobody asks them what these ideas are necessarily. Programs are given to them. The Ministry of Education is definitely committed at this point, because particularly in 2022, there was a policy moment in which the ministry committed to include curricular learning outcomes around reproductive health in the curriculum. But the question is also, how will this happen, and so on. On a teacher's side, teachers are unprepared. They do feel a backlash from parents if they teach something that doesn't align with the values of the house. They feel that they themselves haven't been subjected to these conversations. They don't know how to navigate it for themselves and with each other. So they don't know how to bring it to the classroom. And then on a civil society level, there is a lot of in the field, but also there is donor-driven programs. So every civil society organization wants to work on its own piece of the pie. So this leads to my recommendations of multi-stakeholder partnerships, the importance of it, but also centering a vision of a decolonial lens. There's a lot more to share, obviously, and I'd really love to share more. I'd like to remind everyone that on December 6th, 11 to 12:30 a.m. EST, I'll be sharing more, so please come and we can have more discussions.
Thank you, Nariman. Ecosystem and breaking silos. I think before I begin that, I just want to bring up a few comments that we received over the days. One of the sessions we had earlier, someone mentioned, we've been doing this ecosystem work and it's not really changed the last 30 years. Nothing's really changed. So how is it any different? Which is I think, a question all of us hold. And I think it's a very critical and important question, because this ecosystem approach is not necessarily new in concept and in approach, but I think how we go about it and who we bring to the table. And another person commented, and which is very important, is to have a convener, to have someone who takes the lead and to really open up space for different partners to come on the table and to work together and to open up the space and the resources. So for me in Bhutan, same as in Egypt in some ways in terms of the silos, I think, my work on gender transformative climate literacy, or GTCL, is that it works at the intersection of gender, climate action, and education. And these three issue areas, although there is work in each of these issue areas, there is very little meaningful intersectional work. Forget about between the three, even between the two sometimes. So GTCL is really trying to make that space and trying to bring actors and trying to, like I said earlier in one of our earlier questions, the narrative, it begins with recognizing the problem and then to really build a narrative around it and to open up space for that. And in my policy brief, I've recognize the Ministry of Education being the leader and the convener for education. And education, not necessarily within the school system, it can be education, a whole life, if you think of it as a learning journey. But Ministry of Education to really open up space and to bring in actors and ecosystem actors, which are not necessarily in the traditional spaces of education, for example, private sectors, entrepreneurs, to bring them into the space to, for me, it's more specifically climate literacy or climate skilling, to bring in real life actors so that children who are taught the climate change subjects in schools are then able to see real life application and to contextualize and manifest in their own minds what it means to them and how they can apply this moving forward. And I think the other set of actors that we should bring in, especially when it comes to challenging gender norms, is are the families, the parents. And again, in my policy brief, I give suggested examples of how that can be done. But parents really have, because the gender norms normally start at home and it gets entrenched as they grow older. But to bring in parents to get this this exercise of challenging gender norms. And again, the social entrepreneurs, I think, just bring in a lot of real life examples on problem solving, innovating, building a team, and getting resources on board. So all of that, I think, are areas where a GTCL approach would really help transform and hopefully, bring a little bit of relief to teachers, because we can't expect teachers to keep innovating and do all these things. By bringing in real life actors or bringing in actors outside the education system, you're able to add value to that. And I think overall, such rounded education prepares citizens for a resilient future. At the end of the day, I think climate change will be a losing battle because of inaction rather than action. And it's in our hands as human beings or citizens in this world to really take on this challenge of how can we live a life that is climate adapted, so we all create, a resilient mind and bodies for a green future.
Thank you so much, Nariman and Dinley. And Dinley, I'd like to pick up on something that you said, which is about building a resilient future. And I think it ties directly into the theme we have for today's symposium as well, which is forward-looking, and it's thinking about building more resilient. and gender equal futures. But I also realized that resilience is a term that might have many different meanings in particular contexts. So as a question to all of you, I would like for you to reflect on what resilience means in your particular context, how it's shown up in your work, and how you think, as we look towards the future, education systems can be strengthened to achieve more resilient futures. And maybe this time, Susan, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Amna. Coming back to my situation in Uganda, the refugees host communities, I think and believe that a resilient future will be a future in which girls are healing from trauma, the trauma of being child mothers, teenage mothers, being child brides, the teenage of being thrown out of school, the trauma of, being pointed at, the stigma, So healing from that would cause resilience. And that means that, there has to be a structure within the school system that is built to support these young people in terms of psychosocial support, in terms of counseling, guidance and counseling. And it has to be deliberate, consistent, framework. For now, of course, we have the, senior women and senior male teachers in schools, but how effective are they? And the more we can make the system effective and structured and consistent, then it would help the girls. They have challenges with things to do with childcare. How are we bringing that in to support them to be able to return to school, be able to sit and concentrate? So the system needs to build up a holistic framework that can actually support and encourage the girls to be in school, complete their school, but also within the communities. What can be done? Structures need to be set in so that we can build that resilience for psychosocial support, for counseling, that needs to be deliberate. Thank you.
For me, there's no other way to say this. A resilient future is a feminist future. It is a future where girls are in the center of the futures that they want. And education policies and programs have to create safe spaces to help girls design their own futures. In India, especially, the government recognizes the vulnerability that girls face, and there are large-scale schools that cater to marginalized adolescent girls. And to just pick up on what my colleague Tunde said, they can be the convener of these initiatives, mobilize the girls, bring resources, have schools become the entry point to the adolescent girl programming. But more than anything, using the rich culture that exists in India of working with civil society partners, where civil society partners can bring in innovative curriculum, pedagogy, and most importantly, program support, because that really ties all actors together and makes the system work together for the betterment of girls. And hence, schools can become the gender-transformative safe spaces, and that can be the crux of strengthening the agency of girls and voices of the girls.
So just picking up on Anusha, I think for me, a resilient future, as many of you may have guessed, is a green future. For me, I think gender transformative climate literacy can strengthen the education system, and we have to leverage on the education system and the learning approaches towards a desired learning outcome. And the way my theory of change is through GTCL, we will arrive at a desired stage where climate action and gender is embedded within the learning systems of education and skilling rather than siloed. And essentially centering youth voices, both boys and girls, in climate education and climate action is important, because I think we call on the young people as the future, and they have the largest stakeholder, but they also the present. They are now here with us. And we as the older generation, or kind of older to them, need to be the intergenerational allyship and to provide them the right knowledge, skills, and platforms so that they can do their best. And through GTCL, my policy brief, I have suggested a few recommendations from our own country, Bhutan. And to that note, I would also like to say that tomorrow, December 5th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, which is 8 p.m. Bhutan time, I will have my individual workshop on gender-transformative literacy for Bhutan's resilient and green future and what it means for policy and practice. Thank you.
Beautiful. I love it. I love all what my friends here mentioned. A healing, feminist, green future. And for me, I would add that a resilient future is a decolonial future. A future in which different ways of being and knowing are equally valued. They have a seat at the table of deciding how to face interconnected, complex global crisis. And when we talk about different ways of knowing, it means actually rethinking how education shapes our imagination beyond the standardized imagination of the world. It means valuing the diversity of what people think and belief about gender norms, roles, relationships, bodily autonomy. So on a global level, honestly, I believe that the days of regular donor-driven development programs, where countries just accept grants for standardized outcomes that are set by people in the global north, I think, and that just determine how countries should go in a development pathway, I think this is long gone. I've been working with people for years, and I know people have desires and ideas and thoughts about how their future can look like and have the solutions to that. And I think that self-determination is a way forward. And if we don't acknowledge that and support it, I don't see other ways. And obviously, similarly, on a local level, we can't centralize education around one view of how people can or be. So obviously, also, it's an impossible task for local governments to work without multi-stakeholder partnerships. So just ending with that, having a pluriverse of imaginations about the self, the other, ideas and ways of addressing problems is not just nice to have, but it's imperative to have.
Great. Thank you so much, Nariman. And I'll pick up on, the word that you just used, the pluriverse, because we see a pluriverse of so many different futures, a healing future, a feminist future, a green future, and a decolonial future. And what you all have done today, I think collectively is, we've thought about barriers to all of this, but we've also highlighted feasible pathways for creating these futures. So, thank you for sharing some of your research. And I would also like to say that this has been a sneak peek of the 2023 Echidna Global Scholars research. And they'll all be doing deep dives into their work tomorrow and the day after. So on December 5th and 6th, and we invite you all to join us for that. And just a quick reminder that you can send your questions to events@brookings.edu or use the hashtag Echidna Symposium on X to send us some of your questions. And I see that we already have some questions that have been coming in. So I'll start with those as more sort of stream in. And the first question actually comes from Deepak Bhatia, who's at the World Bank, and who's curious about the role of AI and its applications in the field of gender equality in and through education. And Nariman, I know this is a field that you've been sort of working on in your work at the EdTech Hub. And I wonder if you have any thoughts to share with Deepak on this.
I love the question. Thank you, Deepak. I mean, technology is not a new thing, obviously, in reproductive health. And the question is, who sets the agendas for these technologies? What biases do they come with, and how do they get deployed, right, in the global south? And I think I've worked with a lot of people, citizen sector organizations in Egypt, who reach adolescents through digital spaces for sexual and reproductive health. So this is there. And it's a space that where we definitely need to reach young people more and more for sexual and reproductive health. I also know that AI does hold a potential for potentially personalizing journeys, personalizing messages, using chatbots for answering questions. So these are all on the positive side of things. The most important is just to understand how we're training the machines, how we are training also, like doing programming based on local languages and local dialects. This is extremely important, what biases it comes with, and that the Global South is not just another testing ground for a long history of reproductive health technologies.
Great. Thank you so much, Nariman. And then we have a question coming in from Shakil Ahmed of Ridiculous Futures. And he's brought up a question about what are some strategies of hope in situations of trauma. And Susan, I know you spoke about this briefly in your reflections, but I wonder if you have other thoughts to share with all of us about strategies for hope in situations of trauma.
Thank you, Amna. I think and I want to believe that the first strategy for hope for young people is education, because education changes lives. And here I'm not, saying that there is a particular framework for education. Nonetheless, I think and want to believe that every young person needs that opportunity to be able to get educated, get an education, and be able to make certain decisions for themselves. Because what I have seen and what the practice actually is that we often seem to say, okay, here is a young girl who has gotten pregnant, so she should go into skilling, without giving her the opportunity that, okay, despite the fact that I have made a mistake or something has happened to me, that if I can still become who I need to be, my potential can still be fulfilled. Secondly, we are talking about frameworks, policies, guidelines. How can these guidelines be utilized to actually tap into the potential of the young people, other than just pushing it to them and saying, this is what needs to be done? How can we actually center the girls, center the young people into this, and so that they are part and parcel of the processes that, identify solutions and seek alternatives that could be. Thirdly, I want to believe that if we could reimagine education for young people in conflict, because we can also see that conflict is on the increase and young people are majorly being affected by these conflicts. So the issue is, how can we ensure that they are not left behind in trying to see what the processes and what we can actually do, moving away from the traditional processes of saying that this is what needs to happen, but being open and flexible to what can be, can actually be attained within the circumstances that the young people are in. Thank you.
I can add on a few points where I feel both my colleagues have actually spoken about centering girls, right? Like to say that they need to remain in the formal education system, because the formal education system sets the stage for, a competitive world. And so the formal education system and the school could be and should be the safest space for girls to be. But at the same time, while girls are getting educated and passing high school, strategies must involve that they continue to stay within the higher education. So where are the colleges? Are parents okay to send the girls to another city? If not, what would be the infrastructure? How do girls travel to these places? Because mobility can be one of the challenges to having her continue in the system. So we have to think not for today, but for 20 years, because this girl is going to want a future, and the future should involve these ecosystems that will support her all the time, including when she wants to get into work. Because especially in India, you can see that the enrollment and high school graduation rates are going up, but actually women in the workforce still remains a challenge, because again, socio-cultural expectations of what is her role in the family continues to be that discussion point, right? So we need to create that ecosystem. And unless we do that, we will find girls probably going up to high school, but then, again, limited opportunities. But at the same time, as we deploy technology, we must be really aware of, do girls have access to technology? Yeah, we can create this amazing platform with AI for sexual reproductive health, but girls don't own, especially in the global south, the cell phone or a device is almost like controlled by the parent, because they feel that girls will get spoiled if they or be easily away from school and get into bad practices is what they say. So they don't own a phone. So imagine you're building all of this amazing content and technology, but the girls don't have access, or it's highly controlled. So we have to really think into the future. But back to you, Amna.
Thank you. Please, Tile, I believe you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, I have to say something about hope. I cannot not say something about hope, especially given that I work in the climate change space. And I think a lot of young people seeing seeing the events around the world, they feel despair. I think for young people, in terms of how you bring hope and how you manifest hope for them, especially in the climate change space, is really articulating and manifesting something that they can work on, and that is manageable, feasible within their space and in the physical context that they're in, which is then, and how do you do that? And that's, again, working with young people, the older generation, or the people who are in the system, working with them to identify something that they can work on and make the climate connection, and they feel that they're doing something, but also then connecting it to a larger ecosystem, or, well, not ecosystem, but a larger group of young people that they can self-organize with. And I think through the group dynamics, they're able to then energize each other and find the common vision of the common goal that they want to work towards. So climate change can be overwhelming, especially for a young person. They don't know what it means, how it is, but to really articulate and to manifest and to bring to them something physical that they can work on, or even conceptual thing that they can work on in incremental steps. And to really kind of give them and that again goes down back to the resilient mindset, like the long-term thing that you will feel despair, but keep hope. It's a tension. You have to keep working on it. So just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tinley. And I think as we wrap up today, I have a final question, which is about how to incorporate a gender lens in education policy. And I believe this is work that you all have been doing. So if you would like to share, just some particular concrete strategies in how to have a gender focus in education policy, things that you've learned along the way, over the years. Could I start with maybe Susan on this?
Thank you, Amna. Just to say one word, I could say gender-responsive pedagogies, where we take into perspective the needs of all stakeholders, all young people, boys and girls, to ensure that they are able to be a part and parcel of what is transpiring within the education framework. So gender-responsive pedagogy. Thank you.
I can go on next. We must have schools as a safe space. We must have gender-transformative safe spaces in the schools where girls are imagining a future, and not just imagining, but putting steps to that concrete future. We must have spaces within the community where these girls can become leaders and spread the knowledge and awareness to other girls, and almost create like cool girl ambassadors and further gender equality in the communities. We also need to bring boys along in the journey. So we really need to have, again, gender transformative safe spaces for the boys, but really looking at them as allies to our journey of gender equality. At the same time, educators and I would say the really role of young people. There's so many young people who are in social impact and they're doing such fantastic work. How do we channel that energy and have them become role models for girls? When they see a young woman who's very successful, girls want to aspire to be that. So that would be also one of the key strategies we need to see.
Yeah, so I can go after that. I think in terms of how do you center gender in policy, I think policy has to be contextualized. Any policy has to be contextualized in the society that it is, and it has to acknowledge what the ground reality is, because without articulating that language in a policy, it doesn't get translated into programs and approaches later on. So for Bhutan, the education policy actually is under current revision, and the revision is to focus towards a STEM education. But I think even as we focus and move towards STEM education, we also have to acknowledge that there is gender disparity. I think how you focus gender in policy is by acknowledging that there is gender disparity. And to Anusha's point, gender doesn't necessarily only mean girls, it means boys as well. But the reality that we exist within is that there is a difference in the male between boys and girls in terms of their access, their adaptability, their bouncing back, their all of that, So I think policy has to take that and put that into our language in the policy, and that's how you're able to then center gender in policy, and not to sound policy shouldn't sound too idealistic. It should have a vision, but it should be grounded in the reality of it. I would say my 2 bits on this in terms of how to center gender in policy is to keep it real and to contextualize it and to acknowledge the disparities that exist so that we're able to overcome those.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I would say we have to acknowledge that there's different levels to work on. So there is the purpose level, like why are we doing this? And are we clear on why as a country we're doing this? Is there a political will for it, or is it lip service? Just to be real, as Finley said. Content is the second thing, and one takeaway I'd say here is to start by revising the gender stereotypes that are embedded within and across textbooks and learning outcomes and different curricula, even if it's math and science and so on. There's a level of implementation and a level of continuous learning and sustainability. But on the level of implementation, the one thing I'd say is to actually foster spaces for actors. Like sometimes we're all about, let's save the adolescents, let's do stuff for the adolescents. But also it's to foster spaces for us as adults, workers in development, in policy, all of that, to unlearn and deconstruct our own gender imaginaries and and our own taboos and our own shames. And we're still learning ourselves on the way. So just how can we deconstruct this for ourselves as we are able to hold and heal also for ourselves as we're able to hold these kinds of spaces for adolescents.
Great. Thank you all for sharing. And this has been such a thought-provoking and engaging conversation. We've talked about shared aspirations and shared challenges, but I believe we've also talked about very concrete steps and feasible pathways in moving towards more gender equal and resilient future. So thank you to the Echidna Global Scholars for sharing all your work with us today. And I want you to remind that this is just a starting point for conversations that we'll be having over the course of the next few days. And we'll be hosting a deep dive interactive virtual workshop on December 5th and December 6th. And we will also be in conversation with an extraordinary group of national and international actors who will explore the findings of the Echidna Global Scholars and recommendations in more details. So you can find more information and register for both of these events on the Gender Equality in and Through Education Symposium event page. And also a quick reminder that our applications for the 2024 cohort of the Echidna Global Scholars is also now live. So please find more information about that on our website. So thank you again to our Echidna Global Scholars, and thank you all for joining us today. Please continue the conversation on X using the hashtag Echidna Symposium, and we hope to see you in our virtual workshops. Thank you so much.